Yeah, sorry, thank you. Okay, well, I don't know whether everybody heard what I said, but I pride myself on having a fairly clear voice, but there's nothing like a bit of amplification to help it. Do we have any apologies for absence, please?
We do, Chair. We've had apologies from Councillors Amanda Parson-Hulse and also Councillor Ian Cuthbertson. Thank you.
Thank you. Any others that anybody knows about? No, thank you very much. Does anybody have what is described here as a disclosable pecuniary interest? Speak now or forever after. Thank you. Third item is possible exclusion of the press and public. I'm not aware that there are any private items on the agenda, so we carry on. The next item is the minutes of the meeting held on the 22nd of September. They are here for your information. Does everybody agree that they are a true record of what transpires? Well, those who are here, sorry. Yeah. Okay, everybody, thank you. Right, item 5 will be very short because I have no particular comments. As I've said, I'm standing in for Amanda. For how long, I'm not sure, but I will. Maybe at the next meeting, I might have some comments to make if I have a word with officers in the meantime. Yes, it does occur to me that item is a kind of any other business item, but or it could be, but I won't be tempted to ask if anybody's got any other subjects they want to talk about. Not at this stage, at any rate. Item 6, decarbonisation. We've had a report which I hope members have had a chance to read, and I will ask Dave Pearson to introduce his colleagues, and we will have not a presentation exactly, but an elaboration of what's on the agenda.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and hopefully the paper presented to you is a sort of basis for the discussion which we had at the last meeting. I think the Chair is quite keen to bring forward a discussion around decarbonisation and the work that's being done. So we've sort of put together a paper which my colleague Helen will talk us through in a second, and our colleague Matthew is particularly involved in the carbon impact assessment aspect of this work. So we'll sort of talk you through the paper, and then obviously we'll be here to help and guide the conversation as it transpires from there.
Thank you. So I'll give a general introduction of what the paper's doing and saying, and then I'll hand over to Matthew, if that's okay, to just talk through the carbon impact assessment bit specifically. As David just said, it was decided to bring forward the transport decarbonisation agenda item to this scrutiny committee forward on the work plan. What this paper is doing is setting out a number of areas, setting out the work that we are currently doing as an organisation, particularly on transport around decarbonisation, but also bringing together, basing that, within the climate environment plan, which was published a while ago, and bringing forward kind of the carbon impact assessment work that has also been discussed at the Combined Authority earlier this year as well. So if you go through the paper, you'll see basically that we are referencing there kind of our climate environment plan, which is 21 to 2024, and kind of it was agreed at the Combined Authority in October 2021. And this sets out kind of what we are trying to achieve in that time period and the funding available to try and to work towards and doing that. So, and that's across the piece, that's broader than transport, across housing, across infrastructure in general as well. We're also within here in our kind of funding position set out where we are across a number of areas, and for example, where we are on our city region sustainable transport settlement and our zero emission bus funding, both of which we've been successful and gaining settlements from government on that, and kind of where we are kind of on delivery of those. We also within here, we talked then about the carbon impact assessment, but also within here, we then just provide a bit more of an update on kind of the wider kind of transport agenda, if you like, and kind of where we are on there. So really briefly, the zero emission bus funding that we were successful with has allowed us to work with operators to bring a further kind of up to 116 new electric buses into the region for delivery over the next 18 months, which helps us towards kind of delivering more zero emission buses than we currently have operating in the region. We also talk through in here around, so we also kind of in general, we are starting work on our new local transport plan, which will really kind of focus on decarbonisation and quantifying carbon. We're waiting for guidance from government, but government are really keen in the conversations we've been having to make sure that all new local transport plans focus on both of those two areas. So the work we're really doing at the moment is looking at our strategies across all the modes and across kind of a number of themes that help us towards delivering on that ultimately. So and Transport Committee are engaged in that process. They are the main areas in there. The paper also sets out kind of what we're doing around walking and cycling as well, and also what we're doing around electric vehicles. So as part of the local transport plan, we are writing a walking and cycling strategy, and within that kind of setting out how we can get more people to walk and cycle and engage across the piece. And we are also working on an electric vehicle strategy as well, which that's building on a bid we weren't successful with early in the year, which was looking at electric vehicle infrastructure. But we are taking the essence of our bid to basically help us build a strategy around electric vehicles to really try and kind of stimulate that changeover in the car market as well within the region. So if I could just hand to Matthew, if that's okay, to just talk through the carbon impact assessment bit specifically, and then we can open up for a discussion, if that's okay. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So I wrote the section of this report which is entitled Carbon Impact Assessment, and it's about the work that we did to look at the carbon impact assessment of schemes that are being developed by the combined authority. So the first thing it identifies is the wider aims of the carbon impact assessment project, and the main thrust of the project was to incorporate carbon impact assessment into the assurance process, and that's been done. We now have methodologies for evaluating the carbon impact through the assurance process, and promoters are now carrying out carbon impact assessments as part of their preparation of business cases within that process. The other thing that we did with the carbon impact assessment project, and that's the element that I focused on here because it seemed to be the element that you were most interested in, was the assessments of existing schemes. So we carried out an assessment of a selection of schemes which are currently going through the assurance process, or were currently going through the assurance process, in order both to look at the carbon impact assessment of those, look at the carbon impact of those schemes, but also to learn from that process and to inform the methodology that was being developed at the time. So what happened was we looked at the carbon impact of this selection of schemes. We looked at what information we had, what information we might need, and we used the learnings from that to inform the development of the methodology which has now been incorporated into the assurance process. We published a report. It was written by our consultants who were engaged for the project, Mark MacDonald and Ricardo, which gives details of those assessments of existing schemes,
and covers a little bit of the challenges that we faced with this significant piece of work, and why there was a degree of uncertainty about the carbon impacts that were uncovered as part of that work. And I go into that in a little bit of detail in the paper under the sections entitled General Comments about transport schemes, and how these assessments have informed the development of the methodology. That's the methodology that's incorporated into the assurance process. I don't want to cover those in detail. I hope you'll have had a chance to read them, but I'd be very happy to answer any questions that you have on the Carbon Impact Assessment Project more generally, on the results that we got from these assessments of schemes, or on how our assessments of schemes fed through into the development of the methodology that has been incorporated into the assurance process.
Thank you very much. There's plenty to go at here, it seems to me, and I think that we've got plenty of time to talk about this. Can I just make one point before I bring anybody else in? Paragraphs 2.9 and 2.10 talks about 15 actions being prioritised. Unfortunately, I don't think any of these actions are mentioned anywhere in the paper, and I just wondered whether it would be easy to grab hold of a list of those, so that we know what the combined authority is actually going to concentrate on. I'll leave you to think about that. Councillor Brooks has indicated that I'll bring her in first. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think my first question is, in terms of these impact assessments, is the methodology going to be different for Leeds projects than other areas? Because we declared a climate emergency for 2030, not 2038. I think I'm just 2.20. It's mentioned Appendix B and Appendix C, but I can't find the appendices. So could you please talk me through what these appendices are, or where to find them, so that we can have a proper discussion about it? Thank you.
Will the methodology be different for Leeds? No, the methodology is the same for all the schemes, all the district schemes. So it's a common methodology. We decided to report carbon emissions under different reporting periods, and one of the reporting periods is up to 2030, another is up to 2038, and because that's the combined authority net zero target, and the other is up to 2050, which is the national net zero target. So you'll be able to look at the carbon impact of schemes alongside your own carbon target date and work out what contribution that scheme makes to your own target date. The appendices B and C report mentioned in paragraph 2.20 refer to the appendices of the report, the McDonald's report. So that's available through the papers for the combined authority meeting where it was reported, which was the meeting of the 22nd of July.
Okay, if that's important information though, it should just be in this pack. Like, referring to appendices that we don't, like, I don't know where that is. How am I supposed to look at it?
Yeah, apologies. That's a mistake on our behalf. What we should have done in here is provided a link to the paper that went to the CA, which we haven't done, but we can circulate that afterwards.
Well, how are we supposed to have a discussion about it in this scrutiny meeting without having had that information?
Do you want to just talk through the contents?
I'm happy to. The appendices referred to are quite detailed. So there's a summary of the results from the assessments of existing schemes, and then there's more detailed results in the form of pro formas, which are in Appendix C. And these are both appendices to that main Mott MacDonald report. So I agree with Helen, perhaps we should have included a link to that Mott MacDonald report in this paper. But that is available in the papers for the combined authority that were prepared for the meeting of the 22nd of July. The assessments of existing schemes, it's difficult for me to summarise each particular result. I've given some sort of general pointers to what the results are telling us about the carbon impact of different types of schemes in the text of the report that we have here. 30 of the 41 assessments were of transport schemes, and they gave us a variety of different pictures of how different types of transport schemes performed in terms of their carbon impact. I can cover that in a little bit more detail if you want me to go through the different types of scheme and the relative carbon impact of those different types of scheme. Yeah. Okay, I'm getting some nods. Right. We found that schemes which directly impact general traffic have a greater impact in terms of carbon emissions. This is because the carbon impact of a transport scheme comes from the carbon emissions from general traffic, cars, lorries, buses which are not electrified. It follows that road schemes which improve the operational efficiency of the road network for general traffic tend to produce a carbon benefit. That's because they're making the operation of the road system more efficient. What the assessments didn't always take into account was the induced traffic effect, which is the traffic that occurs, the additional traffic that occurs as a result of the intervention. So most of the assessments we looked at simply assumed that the intervention wouldn't make a difference to trip making. The same trips would be made in the without scheme case as the with scheme case. Now that is a shortcoming of the assessments, and I fully admit that. However, it's unclear as to what impact that would actually have. So it's technically difficult to work out what the scale of that induced traffic impact is. And that's a challenge for us. I think it's a challenge for the traffic modelling community, the transport modelling community, and it's something we need to consider when we're looking at these carbon impact assessment results. That's schemes which have an impact on general traffic. When we look at schemes which are aimed at public transport, active modes, these have an impact in carbon terms because the hope is that these will cause people to make trips which were formerly made by car on public transport or by active modes. And it is by that mechanism that these will have a carbon impact. We know that, for instance, for cycling schemes in this part of the country, we have relatively low levels of cycling. If we put in a cycle facility, we get an uplift in the level of cycling, which is a benefit in all sorts of different ways. The carbon impact comes from how many of those trips which are being made on that cycle facility, those new trips which are being made on that cycle facility were previously made by car or other more carbon intensive modes. First of all, that's quite difficult to work out. We have mechanisms for doing that. But as I'm sure you can appreciate, given that we have relatively low levels of cycling, we have some evidence of uplift of cycling as a result of an intervention which improves facilities for cyclists. But we estimate that only a proportion of those trips will previously have been made by car. So the upshot of this is that the carbon impact of a cycle facility tends to be relatively low because of those, the only way it has that effect is by tempting people out of their cars. Where we're looking at schemes which reallocate capacity away from general traffic, then we can encounter a problem in the sense that if capacity is taken away from general traffic, then that can cause congestion, and that can cause that general traffic to reroute, both of which have potential carbon downsides. They increase the emissions of carbon. When we were looking at these schemes, it was really interesting to try and work out what the impact of, first of all, the modelling assumptions that we use. This modelling assumption that, for instance, that the number of trips doesn't change as a result of the intervention. Secondly, the importance of background assumptions about what's going to happen into the future, both in terms of traffic, but also in terms of electrification of the vehicle fleet. So what we're trying to do when we're looking at carbon impact assessment, it's the same challenge as we're doing when we're assessing the economic effect of the scheme. We're trying to compare two different futures, one with the scheme and one without the scheme. But in order to do that, we have to make assumptions about what's going to happen into the future to things which affect both the with scheme and the without scheme case. The most obvious being what happens to traffic into the future, how quickly does the vehicle fleet electrify, both of which will have significant impacts on the carbon impact of a scheme, but they will also have, certainly traffic growth will have an impact on the economic assessment of a scheme. We are asked by the Department for Transport to use their core assumptions for what's going to happen to traffic and the uptake of electric vehicles in the fleet for our core assumption when we are assessing these schemes. That's very different from the assumptions that we know, from the forecast that we know we need to do to achieve our carbon emission reduction pathway. Okay? So we've got one vision of the future which is given to us by the DFT, and that's for continued traffic growth, and possibly a little bit of a pessimistic assumption about how the vehicle fleet is going to electrify. And we've got a very different assumption about what's going to happen in the future within our carbon emission reduction pathway. We don't know which one of those two is going to come true. What we are asking promoters to do is to use as a sensitivity test on the assessment of their schemes something which matches the carbon emission reduction pathway in terms of traffic growth and electrification of the vehicle fleet. And that's in order to provide decision makers with an additional point of reference, which gives them an understanding of how sensitive this scheme is, the scheme that they're looking at, is to that very different assumption about what the future is going to look like. So in effect, when we're doing carbon impact assessment, we're looking at the future. We're trying to work out what the future might look like, and that affects how the carbon impact of a particular intervention. We want to make it clear to the decision makers those background assumptions that have been made so that they can take those background assumptions into account when looking at the carbon impact and when looking at the value for money of a scheme. Core assumption that we use is the Department for Transport's default assumption, but we're asking promoters to look at how their scheme performs under this low carbon scenario, essentially to answer the question, if we were to achieve net zero by 2038 or thereabouts or whatever, how differently would this scheme perform under that kind of very different assumption about how the future is going to look. So that explains a little bit about the technical challenges that we've had, a little bit around what the results were that we found from our assessments of existing schemes. And I would emphasise that what the major learning from this was the information that we passed to our methodology. So the learnings that we got from this, which informed the methodology that we are going to use for the assessment of the carbon impact of the schemes within the assurance process. And the important things that we felt around that methodology were overall a feeling of clarity around what the carbon impact assessment was telling us. So not just the numbers, not just so many tonnes of CO2 equivalent over the appraisal period, which can be as long as 60 years. We wanted to know in more detail, first of all, what exactly the scheme was. Secondly, what the background assumptions were that fed into that assessment. Thirdly, what modelling assumptions had been used, so what modelling techniques had been used. And fourthly, what carbon calculation methodology had also been used, because that can make a difference as well. So that's what the assessments were. That's what the assessments taught us about the methodology that has been incorporated into the assurance process. So I think you've got to be wary that the results in the Mott-MacDonald report are very much a sort of first stab, as it were, at carbon impact assessment of these schemes, and we're not really informed by the full range of factors which we would want a carbon impact assessment of a scheme within the current assurance framework to give us. I hope that's a bit more informative.
Yeah, thank you. It would have been a lot better if we'd been able to get that information and digest it in our own time before coming to this meeting, so that maybe officers didn't have to sit and explain that. Like, we don't get very much time to scrutinise, so I think it's quite disappointing that the report is so thin. Like, when we come here to do this, it's a really important part of, well, scrutiny is just an important part of ensuring that decisions are made properly and sensibly, but also making sure that, especially with something as important as climate change, that we are holding the Mayor to account and the Transport Committee to, and everyone else to account, to ensure that we will reach that target. I do find it problematic that West Yorkshire Combined Authority isn't supporting Leeds in the 2030 commitment. I can understand why, I just don't think that it's right when we're supposed to be working in partnership. I think in terms of what you said about the DFT assumptions, like, if we, it's unless I've misunderstood what you were saying, it sounds like we are defaulting to that, and then putting this methodology alongside it. Is that what it is? And then finally, building new roads and adding capacity for cars increases car use. So has that been put into any modelling? Because we should be looking at reducing car capacity, not at increasing it. And then I'll shut up after that.
Can I just, before we get an answer to that, can I just make sure that in the minutes that we have proper references, you know, the two references that you made in paragraph 220. Can we have the electronic references in the minutes, please, for that, and also the 15 items that the 15 interventions that I mentioned earlier, if those can be put in the minutes as well, please, so that we've got. Well, I know it's the second best, but I'm so that we have it in print. We have it to so that we can see it.
Chair, we can follow up with the documentation to members. Well,
I don't mind if you want to issue a supplementary document for us. If it can be done that way, otherwise, can it be put in the minutes of this meeting, please? I don't mind, or both even. Were you were about to give a reply to Councillor Brooks's question?
Yeah, I can only apologise for not including as much technical detail. I wasn't aware that you'd be quite so interested in the technical detail, which I did attempt to summarise in some of the paragraphs of the report that we have. We can provide that link to the Mark McDonald report, which includes those Appendix B and Appendix C documentation, of course. Yeah. You asked about DFT assumptions. So basically, the DFT provides us with a methodology and a set of assumptions that we use for the economic assessment of schemes, and the carbon impact assessment builds on the economic assessment, and it takes a lot of the information from the economic assessment and from the transport modelling that's been used to generate the economic assessment. So, and the DFT assumptions are something we're required to use for our core assumption. We can use additional sensitivity tests to explore how a scheme performs under a different set of assumptions. And that's what we've tried to do with this low carbon scenario that I've described. So I hope that promoters will be presenting to us both a carbon and a value for money impact assessment under both of those two different scenarios, which, as I mentioned earlier, should provide decision makers with additional information about how the scheme performs in very different views of how traffic and the uptake of electric vehicles will occur over the decades to come. Something which we don't really know the details of. You talked about induced. I think you talked about car trips generated by the intervention. That's induced traffic, and in the main, our assessments did not include induced traffic. This is a particular challenge, I think, for transport models. To what extent will an intervention generate of itself new trips? And it's actually a really difficult challenge, I think, for the transport modelling community to address convincingly and properly. But of course, unfortunately, it will make a difference to the carbon impact of a scheme. So it will have an impact on that carbon, the carbon emissions that we calculate the scheme will have. What we want to make sure is decision makers are aware of any of that shortcoming, if it is there in the assessment of a scheme, and any other shortcomings that are in the assessment of a scheme. And part of that, the pro forma that we're asking promoters to fill in on carbon impact assessment, is a description of how the modelling was undertaken and any particular shortcomings, including the one on the calculation of induced traffic, that are part of that assessment. So we are at least trying to make it clear where that has been omitted. It isn't always possible, I think, for promoters to include induced traffic in their calculations, but it is unclear to what extent it might have an impact on the economic assessment and on the carbon assessment of any individual scheme.
Councillor Watson, thank you.
Thanks very much, Chair. Just on induced demand, I was a student at Lancaster in the 1990s. Professor John Whiteleg was lecturing on induced demand from transport schemes in the 1990s. It's really well known that you build capacity and the roads fill with cars. I don't know why it's a problem for transport modelling when it's been talked about since the 1990s. However, that's not the question I want to come in on, which is, as you put out as you've said in the report, thank you very much, we've got a target, haven't we, to get net zero by 2038. And Element Energy, they've given us 3 different pathways to get there, haven't they, in the SERB. And the range is by 2030, whichever, I know you know, it said in the report we haven't chosen a pathway, but the range of those cuts that we need is between 44 to 57% by 2030. And that's even acknowledging that that's not enough to get us to the 2038 zero carbon target. It looks like even Element Energy, you know, their report said you're not actually going to get there, even with these pathways. So if we look at 2030, we basically need to be making sort of a 44 to 57% sort of reduction. There is nothing in this report, there's no data in this report to let us know as a committee, and obviously, as we've heard from Councillor Brooks, it is a scrutiny committee, are we on track to meet that decarbonisation target we've got? So, you know, there's a lot of things about what we're doing, but there's no data. So here we are at the end of 2022, we're a quarter of the way to 2030, and all I'm asking is, can you let us know, are we on track with our transport decarbonisation? And if we're not on track, what are we doing to get us back on track?
I can answer some of the questions that you've got there. We, in the Carbon Impact Assessment Project, these assessments of existing schemes, we only looked at 30 transport projects. We looked at 41 projects overall. We only looked at 30 transport projects.
I'm not talking about the transport projects in the Carbon Impact Assessment. I'm talking about the whole package of things that are either laid out in the what's it called? the West Yorkshire Climate and Environment Plan, all of the interventions that have been talked about. So it's not just those schemes, it's everything. So we need to know the data from everything that we're doing. Is that adding up to us being on track for our decarbonisation target or not? Which of those pathways might we be in, or are we not meeting any of them?
I think I'd better defer to Helen on this one, because I only looked at those, the carbon impact assessment schemes.
That's okay. Thank you. So there's a lot of work going on at the moment to basically work through some of those actions, and some of those actions cross a number of areas, and I can tell you where those actions cover from the paper. Within that, there's a lot of kind of projects being started and a lot of kind of work underway at the moment. So we're in a process at the moment of working through all of that, and then working through how we then monitor, how we track some of that. So, for example, across a number of those areas, the actions cover the electric vehicle strategy, they cover bus reform, and they cover and they cover kind of the local transport plan and its work around all of that. So all of that work is in progress, and that's kind of some of the biggest areas. And we have to remember transport is the biggest emitter. Which is why the transport schemes is the main part of that. So that's work that's all ongoing at the moment, and we can't say what that's doing in terms of helping kind of decarbonisation and such, because that's work that's kind of in progress at the moment. The wider actions though in there, in terms of relating to kind of things that we are doing in the climate environment plan around the Better Homes Hub, for example, and doing energy efficiency refits in that area, and business sustainability programmes supporting the SMEs across that area. We're also kind of contributing to areas around the net zero grant support for communities on the better neighbourhoods, and doing a lot of campaigning and marketing. So there's a lot going on in a number of different areas. The indicators are now all included in the State of the Region report, which was released in September, I'm going to say, and they're reported at every meeting of the Climate Committee, and being added kind of over time. So reporting around some of those wider targets has been produced and provided through those committee channels.
Helen, thank you. I don't think actually that answered my question. So I know that you were saying that there's some data, and a little bit of that is about some of the interventions on transport, and then there was stuff that obviously is about our wider decarbonisation. We as Transport Scrutiny, we need to know if the interventions that we're doing, if we are on track or not. So all I'm asking is, can you reassure us that we're on track? And if we're not on track, when are we going to have the data so we can look at if the interventions are, doing what we expect, or if we need to do something else because those interventions aren't leading us down the right pathway? So I'm kind of hearing that we don't know. So I'm going to say, well, when will we know? Because we need to have that information, because we're now at the end of 2022. We've got less than 16 years now to hit our net zero. It is an emergency, and we need to know if we're on track or not, because otherwise we'll need to start doing some other things.
Yeah, just to sort of clarify a little bit of process. The Combat Authority has adopted its plan, and it has a committee that's actually overseeing this plan. I think that the point that's been made is that the mechanism for reporting that into the Climate Committee, I think what you're asking for as a Scrutiny Committee is actually to have visibility of that and the ability to scrutinise that. I think that's what you're asking for, essentially, isn't it?
We are the Scrutiny Committee, so I think we'd expect to have that data as Transport Scrutiny Committee.
I think the process of reporting to the Climate Committee, I think what's been asked is the reports about the Climate Committee are made available to this committee as well to perform its scrutiny function.
Can I just clarify? So you are saying that Climate Committee has the data from your team to show that we're on track to meet our decarbonisation targets for the transport sector? They have that data, do they?
It's role is to oversee the delivery of the plan.
But do they have the data?
That's not that close to that area of work. But
Okay.
the process is that we have adopted a plan. We have a committee that's responsible for that, and the scrutiny committee here that can scrutinise that. And I think it's doing it in that order.
Okay. So I think I'm going to take that as an answer. I don't think I'm going to take that. I'm sorry. I'm going to be leaving this committee saying that we do not know if we are on track for our decarbonisation of transport. I think that is a message that we've got, because you haven't managed to provide us with the data. We're not sure if Climate Committee have got that data, and hopefully that data is somewhere. But I can't leave this committee with the reassurance that we're on track or not with our plan.
So just to give
Sorry, can I just reinforce that a bit? Because it's fair enough if the matters are reported to the Climate Committee, but it seems to me that it's a relatively simple matter that if the Climate Committee has had a report on the subject, then you just lift that out and put it in the Scrutiny Committee. I think we need to know, as Councillor Watson is saying, whether the Climate Committee has had that or it hasn't. Because if it has had that, then we need to have it as well, please.
Thank you, Chair. You summarised that really well. Thank you.
That's okay, thank you. And I think it's fair to say, because the way we're monitoring this, or the way we've been monitoring this so far, is kind of progress against the actions that are in the climate environment plan, and the majority of those actions are on track as we are working through. And I think that's as an overall thing. I think the challenge we've got there is that and we are kind of overall we're in line with the carbon reduction trajectory we've proposed there. That this was a result. The issue here though is around COVID here, and kind of where we are now and where we were within COVID, and whether actually things may have kind of reversed back down a bit. But that's kind of the data process that needs to happen in the background.
I'll park that for a moment if we need to come back to that point. Matthew, do you wish to, before I bring the next?
It's relatively simple to calculate the carbon emissions from the schemes that we assessed, and the information is there available in the report that I refer to in my paper. So you can total up the carbon emissions from the transport interventions, the 30 transport interventions that we looked at, which are a subset of the overall number of interventions that we looked at. And the contribution of those 30 assessments is relatively small compared to the significant challenge that we face of net zero by 2038. I think that's fair to say. So you can top those up if you want to, and I can provide you with the numbers right now if you're interested.
That would be useful. My reading of that report is actually they led to slightly increase in carbon emissions, so that would seem to suggest that we are definitely not on track with that infrastructure, those infrastructure schemes.
Yeah. When I did just put them into a spreadsheet, the savings on operational carbon are about 70 kilotons of carbon dioxide equivalent over the appraisal period. The increase in capital emissions is 115 kilotons of carbon dioxide over the period. So so you can do the maths yourself.
Councillor Hames.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Just three distinct items. We were lucky enough to have a visit from Mayor Tracy yesterday, and she recommitted to achieving net zero carbons by 2038. In Wakefield, our climate portfolio holder has a net zero carbon target of 2030. Is that a bit ambitious, in your opinion? Before you answer, we'll go on to the next area. The next area is Mayor Tracy came to economy scrutiny last year and was asked about whether she could achieve her targets with the existence of Leeds Bradford Airport not making any concessions on flights. And the answer she gave was that we needed the airport for the economy, but they were building an airport terminal that had been reassured would be totally green and eco-friendly, and so she was supporting that. She was fully in favour of Leeds Bradford Airport. Having been announced that the eco-friendly terminal is not being built, do you think that your work that you're doing is going to be hindered by the fact that you've got to achieve these targets in spite of Leeds Bradford Airport not making any concessions on flights, such as restrictions on essential journeys only or anything like that? That's the second area. The third area is Panorama informs us that Drax Power Station, by burning wood, is now emitting significantly more CO2 than it did when it were burning coal. Plus, they're also enjoying £60 million worth of subsidies for being sustainable, as well as, on the side, they're destroying a national forest in Canada by doing so. So, what impact will the present situation at Drax Power Station have on you achieving your targets by 2038? No, I'll put that off.
I'm happy to make a comment. I'm not a particular expert in domestic aviation or in Drax Power Station. Domestic aviation actually forms a relatively small part of the carbon emissions of West Yorkshire. It attracts attention, but it's actually a relatively small part. The carbon emission reduction pathways suggest that as we reduce carbon emissions from other sectors, domestic aviation will form a slightly larger part of the carbon emissions going forward. On Drax Power Station, I'm afraid I don't know anything about that.
Is there an answer for Councillor Hames' first point?
I am very concerned about the fact that wood actually captures CO2. The moment you burn it, you're releasing the CO2. Wood, to say that burning wood is sustainable, as they are doing at Drax on a massive scale, is really tantamount to sabotage of the whole policy of reducing CO2. I'd even go so far as to say people putting wood-burning stoves in their house is irresponsible, totally irresponsible. I mean, the best thing to do with wood to store the CO2 is to make furniture out of it or make some use of it. And the fact that during this year, the high temperatures that they've experienced around the world and all the forests that have been burnt, there must have been a tremendous amount of CO2 released. So, you know, I mean, I think that the thinking about that you can reduce carbon emissions by making vehicles electric and then produce some of the electric that's produced is actually chucking more CO2 out is a little bit upside down thinking. And I think that we need a more positive policy about how we're going to reach these targets without actually bankrupting the country, you know.
Already bankrupt.
Well, yeah,
Sorry, Councillor Hames made a point about Wakefield's target date compared with the Combined Authorities target date, and he wanted to know whether you thought that was being a bit, I don't know if you used the word reckless, but ambitious. Sorry, perhaps I should. Reckless is a bit pejorative, do we think? Well, actually, I'll put it another way. Do you think that we could get to net zero before 2038?
If I may, Chair, sorry, apologies for missing the beginning of the meeting. So, Noel Collings, I'm Head of Energy and Environment here at the Combined Authority. So, I'm not really at liberty to kind of suggest whether Wakefield's target is correct or not. I will not kind of say that. I think 2038 has been set in terms of the combined authorities target as something that we feel from a regional perspective is realistic based on the evidence and the circumstances that we have within West Yorkshire. We're doing our very level best with yourselves as local authorities and businesses and stakeholders around the region to make progress towards that target. It is challenging, absolutely, of course it is, but it's not the role of just the combined authority to do that. It is everybody in West Yorkshire has a role to play in that, and actually everybody kind of bringing together and contributing to that will hopefully get us to where we need to be. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it's not going to be challenging, but we are trying to put in the measures, as hopefully you'll have seen through the Climate and Environment Plan, some of the activities and interventions need to be put into place.
Are you okay with the
Yeah.
replies you had?
I know the difficult questions for people to answer.
We're here to ask difficult questions. So anyway, let's move on.
Thank you. I find this report frustrating, not least because of the missing appendices and all the things that have been discussed so far. And there are no figures to scrutinise within this report. You know, I mean, well, I said there are some figures, but there aren't the important ones. There's no information about what effect on our carbon emissions all these measures are going to actually have. There's no numbers in there that tell us that if we do X, we will reduce our carbon emissions by Y, or if we do Z, they'll go up by A, B, and C. There's none of that information in there, and that is a bit of information that we really, really need to be able to scrutinise what we're doing, whether it's working, whether we need to do something different, whether we need to go back to the drawing board. Are we going to just carry on as we are? It's really frustrating. However, having said that, 2.30, transport is the highest emitting sector in the region, accounting for 44% of all CO2 emitted, dominated by road transport, which accounts for 89% of transport-related emissions in West Yorkshire. Surely, on that basis, the one thing that we really, really need to do is get cars off the road. And the one thing that will really, really help that is to have a bus service that is actually worthy of the name. And I know I've said that before, I'm sorry, guys. Because, I mean, at the moment, we've got, take the 503, as an example, between Halifax and Huddersfield, two major towns in the region. That bus misses more than it shows up at the moment. It's an atrociously bad service. So what do people do? Well, they get in their cars because there's no alternative. You can't easily get the train between Halifax and Huddersfield because there ain't many of them either. The whole system is completely and utterly broken. We are never going to reach the targets that we need to reach if we don't fix it. And just putting electric buses into the fleet is all very well, but as Councillor Holmes says, you know, if that electricity is created by carbon-producing means, then, you know, it's all a bit backwards, really. And I totally get your point about wood burners. My next-door neighbour uses his frequently. It makes me cough like I'm smoking 60 woodbines a day, and I never have. I think, you know, we really, really need to address the shortcomings in our public transport system. We are never, ever going to get these targets met without doing that. And I know that, you know, buses in London are regulated and everything in London works, well, if not perfectly, then a hell of a lot better than it does here. And I know we've not got the political will to regulate buses from, you know, from the government side of things, at least, to get that so that, you know, everywhere else in the country can have a bus service that works as well as London's does. But we've got to do something, because at the moment the services are atrocious, if you've got a service that isn't well, I mean, it's an ever decreasing circle, isn't it? You get a service that misses a lot, so people stop using it. So the bus companies say, oh, well, nobody's using it anymore, and they reduce the service even more. And then you get to the point eventually where, oh, look, well, there's no point in running that service anymore, is there? Whereas actually, if you had a service that served that little group of villages up on the hillside and went there once an hour or once every half an hour and did a loop, you would get people using the service and they wouldn't have to rely on their cars. And you'd get students being able to get to college or school without having to say, Mum, Dad, can I have a lift, please? Because there's no blinking bus. I know I'm going on. I know I've said it all before, but it drives me absolutely bonkers. Please, 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 can we do something about this? And then there's freight, but I won't even go there.
Chair,
Can I just add to that, just very quickly, because Mr. Pearson knows that I've gone on about this over many years, and it does seem to me that there's a mismatch between what we've been told about earlier and the schemes that can be done in order to reduce carbon emissions, but if the service isn't working in the way that it should, and I'm sure that between us we can find examples from all over West Yorkshire where people have to use buses and there are no trains available, we're going to end up with not very much unless we're very careful. So I just want to emphasise what Councillor Foster said.
And I absolutely understand the frustration that Councillor Foster and yourself have, and many people in West Yorkshire have around where public transport is at the moment in our region and nationally as well. But just to recap, at the last meeting of this, we talked through the bus service improvement plan, which is the sort of plan which the Combined Authority has established for how it wants to sort of recover from where the bus service is now, and I think we had a useful discussion around that, and members will be aware that we sort of have been awarded funding from government to support that plan, and the first page of that is the reduction in fares which took place in September. So we've got a plan. We've also got a sort of major set of issues that are frustrating the delivery of public transport and other parts of life as well. A combination of, in terms of public transport, we have lower use of public transport than we did before the pandemic. Some of that might be down to people losing confidence in it. A lot of it's down to people's travel behaviour changing. We have a workforce issue across the economy, which is particularly impacting upon driving occupations, and bus driver shortages and HGV driver shortages are fairly well documented and are also a factor in play here. And we've done a lot of work with the bus companies, and the Mayor met with the bus companies this time last week to look where we're getting to in terms of addressing that recruitment issue. And that's one further issue. The wider economy, cost of living crisis, and inflation's also in play here. I think also that what members will be aware of is that the Combined Authority and the Mayor has taken the decision to do an assessment on the business case around bus franchising as being a way of moving us perhaps away from over-reliance on the commercial sector to deliver our bus service to something a little bit more prescriptive. And there are various different options that are under consideration at this stage. But bus franchising is a long process, and it's also a process that comes with financial implications for the local government sector in the widest sense. So, and that's a decision that needs to be made in a very structured way, according to the the legislation, but also so that the full implications of that can be worked through. So that process is in place. Do absolutely understand Councillor Foster and everybody's frustration. The bus service is in a good place. Transport Committee tomorrow, we are reporting the overview in terms of punctuality and performance. We've asked the bus operators and the rail operators, because this is a rail issue as well, to come to the meeting to talk us through what they're doing to restore a bit of public confidence in buses and rail services. So, well aware of the frustrations that people are having with the system. We do have, as I think I've just described, various different things in play that hopefully can recover the situation.
Is that okay? Because what I think we're looking for is to get some acknowledgement of the bumps in the road that might stop us from getting to these targets that we and methodologies that we've been hearing about. I don't know whether officers can give us a quick resume of an answer.
Yeah, I mean, I think relating it back to the topic of decarbonisation, and I think as Councillor Foster and other members have said, we need alternatives to the private car, don't we? We need people to be able to do things that don't involve journeys that are the bigger sort of emitters of carbon. So I think what we're trying to do in the paper, and apologies for gaps of information, is to actually sort of paint a picture of all the different activities we've been doing in that direction. But it is an early stages of those actions, and hopefully we're moving in the right direction. But there are bumps in the road, as the chair has said, particularly around the economy, which is actually making some of these things difficult or possibly pushing us in a different direction because of energy security and other factors.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of thoughts supporting some of the colleagues here, and then reference to a question that I have. So, one is reference to the electric vehicle strategy, so that's domestic and bus services, etc. So we're swapping over as efficiently as we can to electric buses for the public transport. We're changing some of the layout in Leeds city centre, which, if anybody uses Leeds on a regular basis, is an absolute nightmare. We've also got if you can class it as a strategy, to try and convince people to go to electric vehicle. And one of my thoughts is what my colleague over the way was mentioned in reference to the electricity infrastructure. So have we done any work to prove that moving to net zero, let's say between 2030 and 38, whichever number that you pick, which unfortunately, if you look at the world as we've got at the moment, most countries that have tried it have failed miserably, so I'm not convinced that it's ever going to work. I mean, Germany spent 15 years and €500 billion trying to do this type of thing, and they've gone back to coal-burning power grids at this moment in time. So that's been a failed experiment for the last 15 years. So I'm more concerned reference to the cost of our community, financial cost. And have we looked, at the infrastructure ability, meaning if we move X number of public transport over to electric, and we're expecting X number of residents to move over to electric cars over the given period between 2030 and 38, have we got evidence that the infrastructure that we have, electric infrastructure that we have, so that's electricity that we bring in off the grid into local and regional substations, that we've got enough power to be able to do that? So that is one of the questions. And the next one is the cost. So if I go back to what I've just mentioned about Germany and their financial cost of a failed experiment that they've had for 15 years, that's going renewable energy, starting a nuclear program, but not quite ready yet. Have we looked at the financial cost to this region of trying to achieve, in transport, obviously, I'm pointing this directly to transport, at what cost implication we have to go net zero? So that is turning all the buses to electric, and the maintenance costs. I've just done a 6-month piece of work on lithium-ion batteries for a national, one of the first national recycling plants purely for lithium-ion, and the sheer cost of moving these batteries, replacing these batteries, the depreciation on the vehicles that they are in by replacing the batteries, and then trying to move them to recycle these batteries. Are these all built into the cost of this region, and the implication that that has by moving this strategy forward so quickly to 2030 to 38, knowing that if we looked at it with sensible eyes, we know that we're not going to achieve it, and B, even if we did, it isn't really going to make that difference to the world's climate anyway. Is that implication built into the costs of the transport strategy? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. So just on the kind of the power supply point, so we did a piece of work a couple of years ago now, maybe 3 years ago now, that looked at from a kind of a bus perspective specifically around the power supply across the region, and where we needed power supply to enable a transfer to electric vehicles. The power supply was considered to be okay. So that kind of enabled some of our transfer, and we probably be able to give you a little bit more in terms of where we are going in the future on the power supply front. Just on the cost side, on the bus side, so as I said, started off with kind of our zero emission bus bid kind of helps take us some way, and we have further funding within our City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement to help us move forward again. Currently, the business case for bus operators to bring in their own zero emission buses doesn't really work, because the initial upfront cost for them to be able to do so is greater than their business case would allow them to deliver. As such, that's why we are, and the operators are, and government are fully aware of this, reliant for kind of top-up grants to enable this transfer to happen. And we are working with government to try and get more funding of this nature to be able to do so. Through our bus reform assessment, we are looking at what the cost is to enable us to have a fully zero emission fleet across the piece, and how we kind of look at whether that is an option within there as something we want to prioritise and therefore improve the offer overall. But I'll let Noel come in again, if that's okay.
Thank you, Chair. Just to kind of start with the kind of point around, have we got enough power, the decarbonisation of the grid. So at the moment, we already see that the cheapest form of electricity generation is a renewable form of electricity at the moment. Offshore wind and solar are consistently considered to be, or no, not even considered, sorry, they are the cheapest form of electricity that you can actually feed into the grid. The reason that we are experiencing the high costs at the moment is because of the way that the structure of that electricity system is actually is framed at the moment, because it is inherently linked to the gas price, and gas forms a kind of backup supply to the network. So your combined cycle gas turbine power station, the price is set at what it costs them to generate using natural gas. So that's why we have the high prices at the moment that we do. As we go forward, the government is trying to decouple that, and then you will find that the electricity price should, and I say should because it is dependent on central government doing something in this space, it should be decoupled so that we are benefiting from the lower cost renewables that we do have on the system in terms of offshore wind, onshore wind, if what we have at the moment, but solar power as well. Coupled to the kind of battery storage side of things, we should get to a point where we have an electricity system which is cheap, efficient and free of fossil fuels going forward into the future. So I think in terms of where we're going, we can only base our assumptions in terms of what the region's electricity mix carbon intensity would be based on government projections of where they think that would go to. You know, none of us have a crystal ball here. I wish we could, because we could see what was in the future, but taking that into account, we just have to go on the government projections. They expect the grid carbon intensity to continue to reduce over the coming decades, which means that we will in 10, 15, 20 years time have a much lower carbon intensity grid, ideally nearly at zero by that point. That will obviously have an implication for what we are powering through electricity, through our buses, through our cars, through our heating systems as well. So I can only kind of give an assurance that based on government projections, we expect that electricity to become greener and more zero carbon as we go through time. In terms of financial costs, I think we need to look at this as kind of as a systems level. West Yorkshire doesn't operate in a kind of an island. It has to interact with the rest of the grid, and the financial cost really needs to be looked at a kind of national level. And consistently, if you look at the Climate Change Committee at the national level, they're consistently saying the cheapest way of doing the generation of electricity, etc., and decarbonisation is through renewables, energy efficiency measures, those types of things. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Well, I was going to ask Councillor Thompson if that's okay.
Chair,
briefly.
Yes, yeah. It was just reference to the power, not if it was green or not, whether we had enough on the projections of going zero. Is the grid that we've got in West Yorkshire capable of the additional power needed to power the buses, the additional cars, etc.? That was one of the main questions. Sorry.
So again, we can go on national projections because it is that kind of national system. So National Grid consistently tell us that the grid can cope with the projections of increases in EVs, with increases in heat pumps, those types of things. So again, we need to rely on the evidence of the specialists in National Grid who are running the network in itself. They're saying that. That being said, people like Northern Power Networks, which obviously are the DNO within this area, do have localised problems. I won't kind of dress that up and kind of say something that it isn't. We know there are issues in certain locations where their infrastructure is just not sufficient to be able to service the need, but that is localised rather than a regional issue. You will find there are pockets, not just in West Yorkshire, but all around the country where you have that issue. We are trying to have that dialogue with Northern Power Grid to understand where these issues might be and have a much more strategic approach to how we address that and make sure it doesn't become issues in the future. And there are options open to us in these areas where we can think, if we are installing things like heat pumps, EV charging points, other ways in which we can be a bit smarter in balancing that demand within particular areas, so utilising a suite of technologies rather than just one technology. So there are options there, but we are aware that there are localised problems when it comes to the local electricity grid and its provision.
Before I come to people who want to have another go. Councillor Firth.
I've got quite a few questions, but I'll link some and then I'll leave some till the end if we've got more time. Noel, I ask you this every time we meet around Scope 3 emissions. So obviously the SERP doesn't include Scope 3 emissions, so anything
any emissions from construction, or where our materials come from. So I wondered, Scope 3 emissions going to be considered in procurement for these projects? So materials used, construction vehicles, emissions, etc. And what thoughts have been given to these schemes in terms of wider benefits rather than just carbon? So looking at the UN Sustainable Development Goals, so drainage, green blue infrastructure, decent work and economic growth, impact on wildlife, etc. So will those be considered when we do procure for these projects? And just a bit of a technical question. Are all authorities and the combined authority using the same methodology and impact assessment tools so that we're all singing off the same hymn sheet? Because obviously there's so many different tools out there, different authorities using them, governments potentially using different ones to authorities. So where does that stand? And has the combined authority managed to develop a system where it's easy for officers to calculate a carbon assessment of schemes, both at the combined authority level and potentially for local authorities as well?
Right. Over to you.
I'm happy to take that one if that would be useful. Procurement and embodied stroke capital carbon. So the carbon impact assessment methodology does include capital carbon. That includes the embodied carbon associated with construction. So it includes whole life carbon, so that capital bit, but also the operational bit that I've also referred to. This is a new development, so we're very much, I think, in the forefront here. Department for Transport have only recently adjusted their transport assessment, transport analysis guidance to include whole life carbon, and we await more details from the Department for Transport about how they want to operationalise that assessment. So we've gone ahead and developed our methodology. I'm aware of other authorities that are pursuing similar methodologies. We haven't got detailed guidance from Department of Transport yet, but we're hoping that our methodology is very much similar and very much in tune with their methodology, and that we will obviously learn from their methodology going forward. And I'm already talking to the Department of Transport around what we've done and how that can feed into the development of their own methodology. So yes, embodied and capital carbon is included, and then the carbon impact assessment methodology. Different tools by different authorities. Yeah, we're aware of other authorities that are pursuing similar objectives, and we're talking to them. But this is a very quickly developing area. Whole life carbon has not been included in the assessment of transport schemes historically, and it's something that we're developing, and we're hoping that together we can move forward and we can learn from other people who are doing the same sorts of things. Is it easy to calculate carbon emissions? The aim of the carbon impact assessment methodology was to try and make it as easy as possible for promoters to do what we wanted them to do. So we advocate a proportionate approach for schemes which have only are likely to have only a relatively small carbon impact, or relatively small schemes in total. We have a relatively simple pro forma for them to fill out to give the information that we need. For more complicated schemes, we would require a more complicated assessment and a more detailed assessment. The aim is, as I've said, to make that as easy as possible for promoters to use, with the aim of providing decision makers with as much information as they can, not only on the actual numbers, and I'm fully aware that we haven't been perhaps quite as forward with the figures as we should have been, not only on the numbers for individual scheme assessments, but also the really important context for those numbers, the information that you need in order to understand what those numbers are telling you and what they can't tell you. And those are the things that I've referred to before around background assumptions, what the modelling was carried out, and how that modelling was done. So we hope that going forward, both promoters will find this a relatively easy to use methodology, and it will be useful to decision makers and provide them with the information they need in order to inform their decisions about the progress of schemes going forward.
Councillor Firth, is that?
So you're saying as well with the last bit that you talked about that within that is included extra benefits. So I was wondering around clean growth and added benefits in terms of the UN Sustainable Development Goals rather than simply carbon?
The carbon impact assessment methodology is focused on carbon impacts rather than any other impacts. That's not to say that other impacts aren't important. We would expect carbon to be fed into the decision-making process and decision makers to make their decision based upon all the impacts of a scheme, not just the carbon impacts of a scheme. So it's one piece of the puzzle. It doesn't tell decision makers whether it's a good scheme or not. It just tells them what the carbon impact of an intervention is.
Okay.
Thank you. We've moved around loads of different things since I put my hand up, so I'm going to come back a little bit to talking about how we can measure ourselves and how we can keep tabs on this. I think the first thing that I feel like we are, as the Transport Scrutiny Committee, quite disconnected from the Transport Committee. I feel like we don't have, it doesn't feel like we're coming and scrutinising decisions made by the Transport Committee. It feels like we are wading through a lot of what the amazing amount of work is happening at the back of this, but it doesn't seem that we're talking about decisions and talking about moving forward and working on the same work programme and looking at the same stuff. So I'm wondering whether how that might be remedied. Maybe, I mean, it's interesting that we don't have Susan and Peter here with us to sort of hear the discussions that we're having, and of course I know that will go back, but given that they've got those lead roles on the Transport Committee, it just feels like we're a bit disconnected from the committee itself. Looking at the climate, what's it called, Climate and Environment Plan, so away from the report for this, but just looking at the plan itself, on the roadmaps, just to reiterate, we've not got data, we've not got numbers, we've not got figures, we've not got targets. Like the roadmap for transport one that I'm specifically looking at, we're talking about taking private cars off the road. It's that one of the pillars is cycling and walking infrastructure, and all it says is we'll accelerate the development and implementation of cycling and walking infrastructure. What percentage of our target does that make up? How is there any further work to, once we've built it, incentivise people to use it? Like it needs to all of these threads need to come together on towards the 2038 and towards that date, towards monitoring ourselves up to that date. It feels like there's so much work, and we can see it, there's so much work happening, but it feels like it's not, even though it's all pulling in the same direction, it feels like we're just hoping that the byproduct and the outcome of it will be decarbonisation rather than monitoring ourselves and targeting ourselves. We all know that cycling and walking infrastructure gets people out of their cars, but how many people will it get out of their cars in West Yorkshire? How many journeys will it replace? What's the carbon value of that? That's just for the cycling and walking infrastructure. Electric vehicle charging, I can't afford an electric car. I don't know who. I mean, people will be driving their diesel and petrol cars until they die, and then hoping to buy another car that they can afford. I can't afford an electric car. So while it's great that we're talking about charging infrastructure, we're years away from that being the main mode of private car that people buy. And I just feel like a lot of what's in the detail of the Climate and Environment Plan is just like, we hope we'll do this, we hope it'll have an effect. We really need to drill down into the actual value of what implementing this stuff will have. And I know you've explained about about how sort of precisely measuring carbon emissions and imagining what it will take out is difficult to do. But we need to be doing something towards that, because how, as Anna said, I mean, are we going to be here in 2 or 3 years' time when we've got many less years to achieve this, still sort of hoping that we might be able to one day measure what carbon reduction we're able to put in? I think as the Scrutiny Committee, we need to have, I mean, I'm just reiterating what loads of people, we need to have this, we need to have it. I don't want us to get away from that. You know, we're talking about green electricity provision, all that's all really important and that's fundamental, but in terms of how we are going to deliver as West Yorkshire this carbon reduction and carbon zero, whether it's 2030 in our cities or 2038 as a region, I just can't stress enough how much we need tangible sort of measurement and points to check ourselves against. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just just put in before we have an answer. I totally agree with you about the disconnect. It does occur to me that not that I've had much to do with Scrutiny and Kirklees, but they seem to have far more meetings than we do in this context, and I know that then starts making it difficult for people who might be doing that back in their authority. But if you're going to have a scrutiny committee, it should be done properly, and a greater scrutiny would be the thing. So I agree with it. How we actually engineer that is a different matter, which I won't go into. We can have a discussion about that actually. So right.
If I can come in chair on this one again, sorry, hogging the mic a little bit. I think I completely understand the point in terms of the carbon emissions reduction. The climate environment plan doesn't give that kind of additional context related to where those interventions that are in there have come from. I think it's worth understanding, apologies if this has already been stated, the climate environment plan is directly taken from our evidence-based report, which is the carbon emissions reduction pathway piece. That's an 170-page document plus a very detailed model underneath it. The model underneath it and the document, the kind of carbon emissions reduction pathway document itself, do actually give you an understanding of the scale of change that needs to happen across West Yorkshire in all of these different areas. So I think you looked at, apologies, it's not a transport related one because my head's in kind of housing side of things at the moment, but to give you just an idea of what that looks like, if we're to get to 2038 on our homes, what that actually means is we need nearly 700,000 of our homes to have some form of energy efficiency upgrade. That's placed against the context of only having just over 1 million homes in West Yorkshire. So we know that's there. We know that's a key one. In terms of heat pumps, we know we need to do about 650,000 of those to get to where we need to be. So we do kind of know that information. The problem comes is that they are huge figures that it isn't just the preserve of the combined authority to deliver. It comes back to that point I was making around it's everybody in West Yorkshire needs to pull in the same direction to make sure that we get to where we need to be. So there's that kind of element that's in there. The other element I would say is that where we are at the moment is very much coming from a base where we've had programmes, we've had projects which are working on this agenda, but we're now in a position where we have funding that is backing up our real strategic approach to the delivery of this. And actually some of the questions that we are trying to answer here are huge and will take time. So at the moment we're in that kind of almost initial stage of trying to understand the scaling up activity that needs to happen so we can do more as we move through this decade. I know that's a hard thing to say and we can't do everything now, but I'm trying to be really pragmatic in kind of how I'm setting this out and suggesting this. So at the moment, what we see in the climate environment plan is really around the enabling, a lot of that is enabling activity to allow us to do big ticket carbon savings in future years. So again, I'll come back to the homes example. We've had a position where in previous years it's been pepper potted. We're reliant on government doing very competitions which are pitting different areas, different local authorities against each other. That hasn't worked in giving a wholesale retrofit of the homes that we have in West Yorkshire. So we now need to get to a position where we have a full strategic joined up approach across West Yorkshire that allows us to get to where we need to be. That takes a bit of time in getting there and understanding the cogs. It's a complex issue. So we're trying to do as much of kind of that thinking, that strategic thinking, that enabling mechanisms, those structures to be put in place now so we can move quicker as the years go by. So I know it's a hard sell in saying that, but it's really where we're kind of ramping up activity at the moment to go quicker in later years.
Thank you. I think, yeah, we understand. I mean, this is going to this is stuff that is going to accelerate and grow, and it will start to combine. That's, yeah. I do think the point that you back me up on, Chair, about stronger links between, for us to be able to meaningfully come to these meetings and meaningfully discuss and scrutinise. I think we need more work, basically. I think we need more, like I say, connection with the Scrutiny Committee. The 170-page document, give it to us. Let's read it. Let's have it. Let's look through it. Let's put the time and the effort in to let's put the time and the effort into understanding. These meetings have to be meaningful. We have to hold ourselves to account. We have to have the information at our hands. We can handle it. We do this in our local authorities. We can do it in the combined authority. We can look at that, and we can take that back to take it back to our understanding of what we do in our local authority work, and we can share it with our colleagues, and we can talk through it. We need that. We can't just use this as a talking shop if we're going to get anywhere with this. We can't use these meetings as the only place for us to really delve into that information. We need it at our disposal to make this a meaningful meeting moving forward. Thank you.
Chair, I mean, I think I fully understand the points being made here around how this and the other scrutiny committees in the combined authority actually work, which is, I think, there's the point that Councillor Lennox is sort of fundamentally sort of raising. As you'll see from the scrutiny programme, the intention of this committee, as agreed by the committee and by with the chair, is that we would sort of focus on some key themes across the year and have discussions around the key themes. I think that's quite different to how some of the local authority scrutiny arrangements operate in different ways, because they're different types of organisations and different functions. So I think we'll have to take that concern that Councillor Lennox and I think a couple of members around the table have expressed, because the reason why the slimness of this report is that we're sort of bringing themes and as usually discussion to shape how the combined authority addresses these themes. It's not necessarily bringing detail for you to scrutinise, and I think that was never really the way in which these things are set up. And if that's a view that should be revisited, then we can take that back and talk to the respective chairs of the committees to reframe that.
Just really ultra quickly. Thank you. We just want to do a good job of this. We're all here to do this. We want to do a good job of this. We want to be able to make this a meaningful function of the West Yorkshire Combined Authority.
Right, Councillor Ferguson.
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of comments and then one question from me, please. I agree with the other members' frustration about, the partial information, but I don't think there's any point in labouring that point anymore. I think we've made that point well. Likewise, I agree with the frustrations about public transport, and that's an ongoing thing. And whilst ever we've got, lack of political will for that private profit above social responsibility, then I think that's going to be, really difficult to handle. I'd like to respond to my colleague from Wakefield to say that I actually defend Wakefield's brave and ambitious approach and towards our 2030 target, and I know it's ambitious, and I make no excuse for that. We're having some success. We're doing practical things, and so I don't make any apologies for that. And the quicker the better, as far as I can see, and the more, grist to the mill. So that's my little comments from that. Then, in terms of my question, I don't know whether this is part of this methodology, but I noticed that you said, you know, you're interested in what the future looks like. And one thing that we can absolutely be certain about the future looking like is that it involves young people. And so I'd like to ask how much young people's views have been asked and taken into account about this. And the crucial thing that will bring about change in terms of getting people out of cars and onto public transport, etc., is behaviour change. And I wondered how much work, if any, in this methodology has been associated with behaviour change, and how much engagement there's been, if any, and any potential in that for the future. What kind of things are we doing to encourage behaviour change? Thank you.
Thank you. So just first of all, kind of on the young people side and who we engage, whenever we go out to do a consultation or engagement, we are always really keen to kind of engage in multiple different ways to try and capture the broadest spectrum of the world, not just young people, but people from lots of different backgrounds as well, and on a number of different platforms. So through our Your Voice site, but also through focus groups and through kind of community, community opportunities and different times, etc. So really kind of trying to gather the whole picture. On the second part of your question again. Sorry, I've just forgotten what it was.
What kind of if you engage with young people, what kind of things in terms of behaviour change?
Sorry, behaviour change. That was it. Yeah. So we have quite a significant programme of behaviour change activities, targeting a number of different areas. So businesses, but also working with schools, and there's quite a significant programme that we are running at the moment around kind of working with schools, particularly targeted schools, to try and encourage more walking and cycling, for example, and different methods like that. So we have a behaviour change programme funded through a number of streams, and latterly in moving more towards the City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement funding, to enable us to kind of target both businesses across West Yorkshire through our and also through schools as well. And so there are a number of programmes across both to help engage across the piece, because like I say, it's about kind of the whole picture, and rather than essentially targeting specifically small groups.
Right, thank you for that. I've been involved in the schools thing myself, with encouraging walking to school and so on and so forth. Practical. I'm always just interested in the practical things, because we can talk about it forever. But what do we do? And I wondered how far have you gone in terms of? I mean, kids are fabulous with technology, aren't they? And I get my grandkids to help me with everything. So they're and I wondered. If you'd engaged with anything to do with the stuff that kids use, that technology in terms of apps and games and stuff like that, and other authorities have used what's called gamification. I nearly don't say the word, we've talked about it before, but how to use, because people do that, don't they? They engage with apps and things like that and there's lots of papers out there that tell us how this route's been used, and I wondered if you'd done anything about that, gone anywhere down that road, because we've got to engage with the technology with the kids to get them interested for future behaviour change. Thank you.
That's okay. I can provide you with some details on specific types of activities we've been doing, if that's helpful. But gamification is exactly one way of trying to, scoring points in terms of how many times. And those types of activities are one way in which we are engaging and working with schools, but more focused around kind of the skills also, and the knowledge and the what's the word I'm looking for? Experience of trying to actually walking to school, the cycling skills, being able to do that safely, kind of some of the core activities. But I can provide you a bit more detail around that wider picture of help.
That'd be good, thank you.
That's okay.
Okay. Councillor McCarthy.
Thanks, Chair. I won't labour the point, but just to add my name to the frustration that members have expressed. Two questions really. The first one is how these carbon impact assessments feed into the wider decision-making process. So how it balances that with other factors and assessments. So for example, if a carbon impact assessment showed a scheme had quite a large carbon impact, could that lead to it being scrapped or significantly altered? Perhaps not quite clear from the papers. The second one is regarding the zero emission buses. I do find it a little bit surprising that we've bought buses that struggle to get up a hill. For those that don't know, my ward is very hilly. So how long should my residents wait for their public transport to get decarbonised? And if it's going to take a very long time, could we look at low emission buses or hybrid buses or something?
If I could take the first part of that question. Carbon impact assessment, how does it feed into the assurance process? Well, the carbon impact assessment is carried out by the promoters on their scheme, and then it's included with the business case for a scheme when that scheme comes up to a decision point in the assurance process. So at the early stage of scheme development, the carbon impact assessment will be a more qualitative assessment of the scheme. That's a strategic assessment and strategic outline case. When we get to a stage 2, where the scheme's been a bit better developed, we can quantify the carbon emissions, and that will be a quantified carbon impact assessment for the outline business case and FBC decision points in the assurance process. It's just put there alongside the other information about the scheme. So it's very much up to decision makers what weight they give to carbon impact assessment of a scheme and what weight they give to the other impacts of a scheme, because the carbon impact is an important impact of a scheme, but it's not the only impact of any particular scheme. Now, I don't seek to give advice to decision makers on how seriously they should take the carbon impact, but I imagine that in extreme cases, then perhaps they could decide to terminate a scheme if it has a particularly adverse carbon impact. And I hope they will take the carbon impact assessment seriously and take that into account in their decision making.
Is that?
I'll explain a little bit around the zero carbon buses as a point that Councillor McCarthy's raised as well. I think the starting point really is that zero emission buses and HGVs are very much a technology in its infancy, to be fair. So and you will see very little, if any, electric HGVs, and the electric bus market is just beginning to build. And so we're not buying into a sort of mature set of products here, and one of the sort of key issues is range with any electric vehicle, and that the hilly landscapes actually put a greater drain on the battery to operate up and down. So there's still quite a lot of unknowns around the range of electric vehicles, and if you think about a bus, it leaves the depot first thing in the morning, and is out all day, and a diesel bus will be filled full of diesel to be able to do that job, and then get filled overnight for the next day. And to a certain extent, that principle most bus operators have adopted for electric buses, which means that the range has got to be sufficient to be able to do a whole day's work. There are some examples, you'll see it in Harrogate, of where what they call opportunity charging has been built into the cycle, where the bus picks up a bit of charge in its waiting time in a bus station or another place, but you've then got to build quite a lot of infrastructure out and about to be able to satisfy that, and having a bus sort of sitting around during the day being charged up is not a particularly efficient way of using that resource. So lots of further learning and lots of development of their manufacturing industry for electric buses is to come. Hydrogen is also a technology that's sort of on the horizon, that might not have quite the range issues, but the fuel supply for hydrogen is very much in its infancy as well. So the role hydrogen could play in terms of buses is still a bit of an unknown quantity, but there's some trials going on in different parts of the country. So So in a way, that's sort of not a particularly perfect situation. That doesn't mean to say that electric buses couldn't operate in all parts of West Yorkshire, but some of the longer runs and some of the hilly runs we need to look at. In phase 2 of our programme, we've particularly sort of focused on some of the routes that the Combined Authority funds, with some smaller buses which we would look to convert or to have as electric vehicles, and they go to places like Hebden Bridge and Holmfirth and places like that, and we need to pilot that, because I'm not aware of anywhere in the country that's piloted small minibus networks electric in that sort of way. So there's a lot. We've got a long way to go with zero emission buses, but we're making a start.
Is that a good answer? Yeah. Well, as far as it goes. That completes the first round of speakers. I've had Councillor Hames and Councillor Firth who wanted to make a point. I don't know whether that's still true. It might have been done on the spur of the moment. Yes, cool.
Councillor Thompson was seeking assurances about the electric infrastructure. During my working life, I've been heavily involved in the installation of infrastructure. And there might be one or two things that people are not aware of. For example, when you start talking about wind technology, a wind turbine cannot produce electricity unless there's 3 metres of air per second passing. You must turn it off if there's 11 metres of air, otherwise it burns the motor out. So there is a brief period of air passing through the blades that you can generate electricity. So when you see wind turbines turning, they're not necessarily generating electricity. That's the first point. The second point is, every wind turbine you put up, there's 200 metres of concrete goes in the base. That generates more CO2 than that wind turbine will ever save in its lifetime. The only way that wind turbines were installed in UK was by subsidy. The landowner gets £15,000 per stick for 25 years. Right, that was hidden by putting it as a green levy on your electric bill. But it still had to be paid to the landowner. They've taken it off the electric bill to reduce the cost of your electric bill, but it's gone on your ordinary tax that you're paying. So that's the end of that one. Now, I worked on Eggborough Power Station right from it being first built. Eggborough Power Station never ever worked at 100% capacity. It only ever worked at 50% capacity, for the simple reason it had to protect the national grid. And if we were threatened with a power cut, they used to strike it up to 100% to safeguard any particular area that were in threat. And that worked. The second emergency was an hydroelectric power station in Scotland that could be started in 2 minutes. And that was the backup for the national grid. Now, when you see, my big threat now is, by dealing with my constituents, is that I believe, and I'm not on my own, that this country is heading for power cuts, because I don't know a decarbonisation policy that does not depend heavily on electricity. You've got electric trains, electric buses, electric cars. That's a whole sector that the national grid has never ever had to supply. And I can foresee, because we are importing a massive percentage of electricity, a lot more than what they ever admit to, and our relationship with the suppliers is not as good as it always has been, and we've got to make provision for power cuts. I mean, I've been in South Africa, and it's a regular thing in South Africa. Each town is allowed so many hours per day. And this is a real fear to me that we need to look at other methods, and my favourite one is hydroelectric. Hydroelectric wave power, anything that doesn't involve burning something, or even like nuclear fuel, it's burning something. But that's just a point. I wonder what precautions the Combined Authority are doing to sort of ensure that they're going to be able to not turn people off with this green policy by, I mean, people are going to get turned off pretty quick about supporting a green policy if they've got no electricity to watch television with. So, I mean, it's every council that I've talked to, on every audit and governance scrutiny committee, they've got capital expenditure on decarbonation as high risk. And the high risk is not the amount of money that it's going to cost to carry it out. The high risk is the public are going to lose faith if you're depending on electricity and they haven't got any electricity to use. So losing the support of the population is a bigger risk to not being able to deliver this essential climate change policy than anything else.
Thank you very much. That's very, very passionately put, I felt. Now, it would be easy to say, oh no, everything will be all right. The technology will provide. But I think some of the points you've raised certainly are of vital importance, and whether we can cover them with any due scrutiny now, I'm not sure. But is it possible to give a brief response to that, or have we got to build our own reservoir somewhere in order to have electricity generation possibilities?
I think we need to. I think there's a couple of points there, isn't there? In terms of, and I said it earlier, West Yorkshire's never going to be an island when it comes to electricity generation infrastructure. It all works on a national grid where we're pulling electricity from where the wind blows or where the nuclear is created, depending on the demand across the system. So we're never going to be able to act as an island unless we completely withdraw ourselves from the rest of the UK, and that's never going to happen. So, and we do need to make sure that that system is also connected to the continent in interconnectors that from places like France, from Holland, from Scandinavia, where you can then, because of the huge regional variation in terms of huge distances we're talking about, the wind is always going to be blowing in some of those locations. So it's about being able to manage where the wind is blowing or where the solar is being created. You may have seen kind of reference to a huge interconnector being constructed or in consideration to be constructed from Morocco all the way into the UK. It is a vast system where West Yorkshire doesn't act as kind of an island. It has to be part of this wider system that we have. So in terms of how that works, we have guarantees, we have assurances from National Grid, the operator, to say that blackouts they think won't happen. Yes, they do provide warnings at certain points when they feel as though things are getting a little bit tight, the margins. However, they have mechanisms to avoid that happening. They ask industry to turn down their demand. They pay people for demand reduction. So there are ways and means in which we can prevent those blackouts from actually happening. In terms of our role as a combined authority, we don't own the electricity infrastructure, so our role is very peripheral in terms of lobbying, influencing others to make sure that we do have those assets that we can call on. And the final point I would kind of say, I referenced it earlier, is that with the kind of hopeful decoupling of kind of gas prices with the electricity prices, there is thoughts around how do local people benefit more from where they have a proliferation of renewable energy generation. So, for instance, we know Calderdale has got a lot of onshore wind turbines. There's an opportunity potentially with change, with reform of that system, that that people in Calderdale can actually benefit from the fact that they have them in their patch. So that is something that is being considered through something called the Review of Electricity Market Arrangements, REMA. It's something that's on the table. I'm not saying they will adopt it, but that is one of the options that's being considered in being able to allow local people to benefit more from renewable energy that's put in their patch. Thank you.
Councillor Firth.
So I was wondering around the how are the local authorities clear about how this plan feeds into their own climate plans? Obviously, WICA is looking nationally as well, and the clarity there is not forthcoming. Neither is funding. But in terms of WICA and the local authority relationship, how is that working? And our offices and all organisations communicating in what is a very complex arena. And also, it mentions the off-street charging infrastructure fund that we weren't successful in this time. That is a concern to me that that we might be going for it in a time where it's really new technology. There's so many barriers to on-street charging, so many risks to local authorities. So I was wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about whether it's worth waiting longer to see what other combined authorities and other authorities do with that funding to get the learning first, because it's such a risky area.
If I could just come in, Chair. Sorry, it's me again. Just in terms of the working relationship, so there is kind of variation, as you're probably all aware, in terms of local authority plans and our plans. Where we have been able to do, there is the alignment. So a really good example of how that's happening is in Calderdale, where they took our SERP and then put a local lens on what was happening there. I think Wakefield and Bradford were considering doing similar aspects as well there. So there is that link up to show how everything is moving towards a common goal, I suppose, within West Yorkshire around the climate emergency. The other aspect to say is, as we're kind of doing the programme development around everything you see in the carbon emissions, the climate and environment plan, sorry, we are actively involving local authorities in task and finish groups to work up the scope around those, to understand the requirements on the local scale, to help with the resourcing if it is an issue for local authorities. So we're very much trying to join up as much as possible when it comes to all these programmes and activities. And actually, in some cases, we can take a back seat. If one of the local authorities is really pushing forward and leading on that, let's take that learning, let's apply it across West Yorkshire. Let's not be too proud to not do what somebody else is doing really well. The scale of the problem is so big that I don't think we can afford to be proud in that area. But we are absolutely working really hard with each of the local authorities to collaborate and make sure considerations are really factored into the mix.
Thank you, and I can just come in on the local electric vehicle infrastructure bid. So again, that's an example of our collaboration with districts. We work together across each of the districts to try and work out what best to put into that. That particular bidding pot was essentially a pilot pot. So government was spending £10 million across a number of areas that wanted to try and help develop some pilots around the business models, particularly to try and improve kind of what are the options for delivering kind of on-street infrastructure. And as you rightly say, it's a really complex thing to do, and that was what was being acknowledged in that particular. Our final bid submission actually came forward with two different models to try and tackle this, which government actually really liked, and kind of have said that if there's a second round of funding, then we should be in a good position to just resubmit. The areas that were successful were a number of shire counties and a number of kind of particularly rural areas. So the types of model that they were thinking to take through on this pilot's probably shown through some of that. But we had an option there where we had two different business models to include delivery.
Thank you. I'm very conscious. Sorry, I'm very conscious of the time. We have another item on the agenda to deal with, which is the work programme, which is item 7. We had previously agreed to bring this subject to this meeting. It was going to be later on in the process, but it means that at the next meeting, which I think is in January, if I remember rightly. Is that right? Yeah. We would be looking at the do apologise. Oh, right. The next meeting is the Mayor's question time, and presumably that means we don't do anything else. Is that correct? So that the whole meeting, the whole 2 hours, would be given up to questions to the Mayor. Now, I don't. Well, there's one thing I don't know, and that is whether Councillor Parsons-Hulse will be back. I don't know. I would, unless I hear otherwise, I would carry on doing what I'm doing now, unless we have news that she's coming back. So I will take advice on how we organise the Mayor's question. Right, okay, thank you very much for your contributions, much appreciated. What was I going to say? Well, one of the scrutiny committees has already done it. I perhaps need to take advice as to whether they.
Chair, I've just as you've been speaking for the Mayor's question time, just looking at what we did last time, which was a meeting back on 20th of January. I think what we tend to do is sort of officers will produce a sort of update report, and then the essentially the question time, as it were, we'll have that as a bit of a reference point for the discussion.
The Mayor will give an update, and then we can we can all pile in.
and I'm very conscious of comments made this morning around some of the detailed information. So let's just take that away, so that you've got some things to some detail.
But on looking at that another way, if I know that I'm doing this meeting, then I need to have some discussions with somebody as to how to organise it, and how to make sure that we don't keep repeating ourselves, because the Mayor will get fed up if that keeps happening, and some of our members here will get fed up if that keeps happening. So we will need a bit of organisation, I think.
Chair, I've got a recommendation from today, what we need before we can speak to the Mayor. So we need to know what are the emissions now for our transport sector, and we need to know what are the projections to 2030 as a result of all of the planned policies that Jessica kind of pertained to in the West Yorkshire Combined Carbon Environment Plan. And we also need to know, when are we going to have a decision on which of the CERT pathways we're going on? So I think there are 3 crucial bits of information that we need before we can go forward and question the Mayor.
I think because the Mayor's question time is across all the sort of transport and infrastructure topic area. I think what's been suggested there is that one of the appendices we provide to the report to have that meeting is an update report on the climate and environment plan. So we'll take that away and do that.
Councillor Lennox.
I wonder whether for us as a board, as members, once we've received that report, which comes out obviously with some time before the meeting, maybe we should be scheduling like an online catch-up between us so that we can set some priorities, because all of us would love to come in and tell Tracy about our local issues with the buses, and it would be very hard to resist the temptation to do that when we're in the room with Tracy. So maybe after we've received the papers and before the meeting itself, maybe we as a board should have a Zoom meeting or something to sort of just work out how to prioritise what we're going to say.
I think that's a very valuable suggestion, and can you make sure that's in the...
We do a planning session for each mayor's question time.
So right,
yeah.
right.
It's in December already.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, probably. But that would be before we got the papers, though, Adam.
Yes, it would.
We might need to get the papers first before we have that.
Oh yeah, I can see it's there.
Yes.
I mean, that's probably too early for the report to be made available for us, isn't it?
I would have thought.
At the planning meeting, what we do is sort of discuss lines of questioning and potential questions that we'll want to ask. So that's kind of what that is. But are you asking specific questions on what's been said today for the mayor?
Well, David's just said he's going to provide us a new report because we've asked for lots more data that we're missing. So we need that information, and then we need to then have the conversation about what are the questions we're still going to take. Because it could, otherwise we're going to be agreeing questions that Dave can then provide a report. We go, oh, it's there, but we've already thought we needed these questions. So I think there's a sort of logical sequence.
Let's see. I mean, how quickly would the minutes be? How long? Sorry, how long would it be before the minutes are? Yes.
Well, we'd aim to do them in 5 days. So.
Right. Okay. So that's going to be available with the things that I asked for as well. So we should be able to see what we talked about and what we felt we wanted as well. That can feed into the mayor's question time agenda. But I think in a way it's best to leave the stuff for the mayor's question time as late as possible, because things might happen, whatever things might be. I know the decarbonisation thing is a long-term thing, but we've got issues which we've already talked about that also need fairly heavy scrutiny, and in that context, I know there are, or we were told there were going to be workshops on bus problems and things like that. I just want to flag up that if the Transport Committee is having workshops on various issues of that kind, then can we be involved as well, please? Because as well, Councillor Lennox amongst others mentioned, we need to align ourselves with what the Transport Committee is doing, and actually being in a workshop with Transport Committee members is probably one of the best ways of networking that that achievement.
Can I take that and discuss that with the Chair of Transport Committee?
Oh, by all means. I realise I'm only a stand-in, but I do think that we need to do a lot of what Councillor Lennox was talking about earlier. Yes. Well, I'd like to thank everybody for their attendance today, and I know we have had some criticisms, but I think we have had a really good general discussion, which has made quite a lot of very good points, and I think with the addition of the stuff that we've asked for, we could achieve quite a lot. So thank you for all the contributions, and also to officers for so ably fielding the questions that were thrown at you. Thank you everybody.